Israel's political woes, which endanger the security of Israel because of the passions that are involved, not because of the issues themselves. The issues themselves are not a threat to democracy, as is being publicized. It is a threat to tyranny. The Supreme Court of Israel are tyrants. They were not elected. They have no basis for their power, and they're illegitimate. And because they're embedded from a system that was inherited from the time of the mandate, they don't want to change, but in the process have given themselves the power to review every single thing that the Israeli government does and decide whether it makes sense. It's not a question whether it's legal. It's a question of whether it makes sense to them. Now you have to understand, these judges are not elected. They were not nominated by the parties. These judges basically nominate themselves. This is a group of leftist jurists who have veto power as to who can be on their court, and they only allow their ideology to be placed as judges on any court. They are tyrants. Tyrants. They are not democracy. They are cruel, capricious, and imbeciles. They have no basis for their rulings except their own decisions, their own makeup of their own decisions as to what should be the law. This is just insanity. They are corrupt, tyrannical, and deserve to be booted out and thrown in the garbage with the ash heaps of history, as to quote President Reagan. But the reason why this has become cause célèbre is because the left in this country wants the destruction of Israel. Certainly they want the destruction of the Netanyahu regime. Why? Because the Netanyahu regime stands in the way of a Palestinian state. The Palestinian state means the death of Israel. That's what it really means. But they don't want to make it that way. This is a two-state solution. You can't have a two-state solution if one guy is law-abiding and the other guy is trying to knife you in the back. You can't have a two-state solution with those kinds of things. The so-called Palestinians, they're not Palestinians. They are Egyptians, they are Libyans, they are Syrians, they are Moroccans. They were not indigenous to the country till the 19th century. There are very, very few people who were indigenous to the land that is called Palestine pre-19th century, because the place was basically uninhabitable. It was only after the Jews got there and started draining the swamps that businesses, jobs were available, jobs that didn't exist in other places in the Middle East. And so you had hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands of Arabs coming for those jobs. That's what happened. Not Palestinians, they're not natives. Besides the fact that this is the land that was given to the Jewish people, the people of Israel, by God Almighty. The Quran says it, for God's sakes. The reason why they deny it is because there's the belief that the second part of the Quran supersedes the first part of the Quran, and therefore Muhammad declared war against the Jewish people and against Judaism, and therefore any claims that the Jews may have to the Holy Land is just it doesn't make a difference because they're going to kill them anyway. So that's the truth of the matter. We're going to go into the situations of why is it happening? Why is there this disparity, this hatred, this anger, this frustration that about 35% of the Jewish population in Israel feels against the other 65%? It isn't 50-50. It's about 35% to 65%. The reason why the Netanyahu government only has 64 mandates is because 20% of the population is Arab. You take away the Arabs, and you have 35% of the Jews voting for the left, 65% of the Jews voting for the right. But why are they doing that? What's the underlying spiritual reason? So I want you to understand the following. The establishment of the State of Israel happened exactly when it was supposed to happen. I'll explain. Jacob is the paradigm of the wandering Jew, is the paradigm of what happens to us as well. Whatever happened to Jacob happens to Bnei Yisrael. Jacob spends 14 years in a yeshiva, in the holy place, when he goes into exile for 22 years. That's a total of 36 years. Well, whatever happened to Jacob happened to the Jewish people, only a lot more. So let's just for a moment assume that the 36 years that Jacob spends in exile, one form or another, 14 years in yeshiva and 22 years abroad, let's say that those 36 years equal to 3,600 years. If we take that assumption and we look at Seder Olam, we find that Jacob was born in the year 2108. You can look it up in any Chumash, including the Art Scroll Chumash. What happens 3,600 years after Jacob is born? I'll tell you. The rebirth of the Jewish people, the state of Israel. That's what happens. Now, maybe it happened because certain people were not such good people and went against some of the teachings of the Torah, or some other reasons. Clearly, the state of Israel was going to happen as a result of the persecution of Jews in Europe and the murder of 6 million Jews during World War II. It would have happened anyway, regardless of whether there was a Zionist movement or not a Zionist movement. The sympathies of the world was to resettle the Jews who survived the war, resettle them in a place where they could find peace and security. This country, the United States of America, was not willing to take in 200,000 survivors. It's a fact. I was one of those survivors, not a child of one of those survivors, and we were held in the DP camps for 4 years till 1950. And the reality is that the numbers of survivors who were in those DP camps, most of them had to go elsewhere than to this country, which is now claiming that it is a country of immigrants. But when Jews were trying to get in this country, after being decimated, destroyed, raped, pillaged, burned, robbed, destroyed, nobody was listening. They brought in Ukrainians, they brought in people from Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, many of whom participated in killing Jews. Not all of them, vast majority not, but there were several major killers that got into this country because people in the State Department turned a blind eye to that, saying that they could use them against the communists. That's a separate issue, but this country did not open their doors to the Jews after World War II. That's the reality. The only place that Jews could find a haven for after the war, despite Brits' best efforts to have the Jews die in the vine, was the land of Israel. That's where we wanted to go. That's where the majority of the displaced people went. Israel would have happened anyway because of what happened during the Holocaust and before then. And it's exactly 3,600 years after Jacob is born. During those 3,600 years, we had exactly 2,200 years of exile and 1,400 years exactly of dominion over our land, or control of our environs in the Holy Land. Jacob comes down to Egypt at age 130. During his lifetime, even when he was in exile, his parents were very successful. They were considered divine, or people of great distinction, and they were honored, and they were very powerful in their area, and they controlled their destiny and their economics and so on in the land, in the Holy Land. The first Commonwealth after Joshua entered the land lasted 850 years. That's 980 years if you count it. The second Commonwealth lasted only 420 years, but together that's 1,400 years. 1,400 years during which we had dominion over the land of Israel. That leaves us with 2,200 years of exile. So what happens after Jacob comes into the land after 36 years of wandering? What happens is the fight, the conflict of the brothers. The brothers fight among each other, leading to the sale of Joseph. And that's what we're experiencing today, the fight among the brothers. And people should understand that the fight among the brothers can only lead to tragedy. The reason why there's so much pent-up hatred is because, just as with Joseph's older brothers, they felt that Joseph is an interloper, he's a Johnny-come-lately. Now he comes around and he's the one prancing around and he's showing off. We'll show him. That's what happens today. There are people in Israel who think they built the state, they created the state. And these Haredim, these religious people, these fanatics, are now going to take over what they built. We'll show you. And that's driving the anger. The truth of the matter is, no one has a patent on bravery, and no one has a patent on smarts and skills. Don't make a difference if you've got payas and a beard, or if you have no yarmulke and you're clean shaven. If you're a Jew, you have the DNA of the Jewish people. And the Jewish people are survivors. The Jewish people are brave, and the Jewish people are smart. And therefore, no one can say that they're needed more than anyone else in the land of Israel. What is needed is understanding. What is needed is peace among brothers. We have to go ahead and put that aside. There was an election. The election was fair and square. Bibi won. You lost. That's the fact. And it's going to happen more and more because there are many, many more children born to those factions that are right wings than there is to the left wing. Left wingers have less than 2 children per family. Right wingers have an average of 5 to 7 children per family. It's only a question of time, but it's already being shown. They're a minority becoming a smaller minority. And it's time to face up with it. They're a smaller minority. The people who ideologically you disagree with, they're going to be in charge. That doesn't mean that they're bad people or that you're a bad person. It just means you're different. You're entitled to present your case, and they're entitled to present theirs. That's what a democracy is all about. There is no single group of people. In the United States, the left thinks it's entitled to rule. And that's what it teaches young people, that it is only leftism. Leftism is a disease, as is not only leftism in this country, but leftism in Europe and leftism in Israel. Leftism is a disease of the mind. Why do I say it's a disease of the mind? We're not talking about liberals. We're talking about leftists. We're not talking about Scoop Jackson. We're not even talking about Bill Clinton. Despite his peccadillos, his sexual peccadillos, was a reasonable person. And a very good friend of Israel, by the way. Today, we don't have that. The Democratic Party is no longer pro-Israel. Unfortunately, those are the facts. I know that hurts to be said, but that's the reality. There are still some people who believe in protecting Israel, the rights of Israel. Most of them are my age. The young people don't believe that, don't espouse that. They're anti-Israel. They're pro-BDS and all the other nonsense. Well, that's the story. But the main thing is not what's the politics of this country. The main thing is what Jews are supposed to be with each other. We're supposed to be brothers in arms, not brothers attacking each other. And what is happening is the result of the passions of people who believe that the country has to be in their image and their image only. And that's not true. Israel will be in the image of whoever is the majority. The majority of Jews have spoken and will continue to speak from a perspective of the right, not right-wing politics, but from the Torah, the book that gives us our identity. Gives the left its identity, gives the right its identity. The Torah is non-political, and Torah accepts both positions as positions to be thought about in terms of Jewish law, but that's a different discussion for a different time. The reason why we have these protests is because the 3,600 years are over. What is happening now is the conflict of brothers. Conflict was always there. But now that the left has seen that it is lost, it's lost its footing. The only way for it to get power is by creating divisions among the right wing and then allying itself with the Arabs. That's what they see. That's their only way of getting power, and that's the way they're going to get it. They're going to try to get it. It's most unfortunate. Brothers, we got to be brothers, and we got to be peace. And just because we have differences of opinion, we can argue those opinions out, and consensus is built on including all positions, seeing whether we can reconcile those with a single policy going forward. But we have to get rid of the divisions. We have to stop the infighting that happened to our people at the time with Jacob and his sons. We got to do it. We got to stop this infighting. We got to show peace and love and brotherhood. And I applaud the people in Bnei Brak who understood that, did not attack them, welcomed the protesters with refreshments and with signs saying, "Welcome to our brothers from Tel Aviv." And that's the way we need to do this. We need to be welcoming, we need to be accommodating, and not reacting violently, because the worst thing is fight among the brothers. We need to be unified. And when we're unified, we are very powerful.